Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's America Walks webinar, City Limits, Infrastructure, Inequality, and the Future of America's Highways. I'm Ben Crowther. I'm the Policy Director for America Walks, and I'll be our webinar facilitator for today. So welcome. I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners, the Center for Disease Control's Active People, Healthy Nation program, Tool Design, and EcoCounter, who makes our webinar programming possible. In addition to our sponsors, our program's also made possible through your support, and a link in the chat is available if you would like to donate today. A bit of housekeeping before we get to the main event. We'll have ample time at the end of today's program for questions. So as you're tuning in, you'll see on the bottom of your screen a little box that says Q&A. We ask that you put your questions there, put them in real time. We'll log them, we'll record them. We'll hold them to the end, and that's also where you can turn on captions as well. Today's webinar is being recorded, so if you want to share it with friends, families, and colleagues, you can find it on our YouTube channel after the fact. So I'd like to introduce today's speakers before we start. We have journalist and author Megan Kimble. Megan's new book, City Limits, is now available from Crown Publishing. And City Limits builds on Megan's previous work as a journalist investigating highways and the freeway fighting movement. And it looks at how America's ever-expanding highways accelerate inequality and explores other paths forward. So we're going to hear from Megan about the book. And then we're also joined today for a panel discussion afterwards by two activists, Chloe Cook with Stop Text.I-45 and Adam Greenfield with Rethink 35, whose respective movements are actually covered in Megan's book. So we got a great program for you today. I am going to leave it there, and I will turn it over to Megan to tell you a little bit more about City Limits.
Hey y'all, thanks Ben for the introduction. I'm so happy and excited to be here with everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I am the author of this book, City Limits, Infrastructure, Inequality, and the Future of America's Highways. That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. But before I do that, just a quick introduction. I'm an independent journalist based in Austin, Texas. I write about housing and transportation for lots of different publications, including the New York Times, Grist, and Bloomberg. I've written about zoning and housing policy, which ultimately led me to highways as I was covering sprawl. And so that's what actually led me to start reporting this book, is I live about a mile from right here. This is Interstate 35, which runs right through the middle of Austin. Right here near my house is a double-decker freeway. It was built in the 70s as a double-decker. And in early 2020, I learned about a plan to expand this highway from, it's currently about 12 lanes in most sections, to 20 lanes. And that is the central project noted here on this map. TxDOT intends to spend about $4 billion to widen this highway. It's been kind of in the works, discussed for several decades, and then finally it got funded. And so as part of that, they released right-of-way maps showing who would be impacted by the highway expansion. And I started reporting on, folks and businesses that were in the footprint. One of them is this preschool, Escuelita del Alma. It's a Spanish immersion preschool. It's one of the first Spanish immersion preschools in Austin. It was founded in 2000, and it already was displaced from downtown Austin and moved right here to the I-35 frontage road, right near where I just showed that picture. And I spent a day in the preschool talking to the owners, but also the kids, about this place they spend all their days. And so on the right, you have a picture. The day I was there, they were discussing modes of transport and their favorite modes of transport. And I will just note the favorite mode for most children is a fire engine. The book also, so I started reporting this in 2020 in Austin, and then very quickly learned about a massive highway expansion in Houston called the North Houston Highway Improvement Project. Most folks in Houston call it the I-45 expansion, largely because it mostly covers Interstate 45. You can see that map there. It's about a 20-mile stretch of I-45, but the project also will rebuild and reroute Houston's downtown loop. And the impacts of this project are enormous. I went down in December of 2020 to walk in the footprint of the expansion with a group called Stop Text I-45, which you will hear from Chloe Cook later. And I was really struck by how the scale and significance of this expansion. So it will displace about 1,200 homes and 300 businesses. 2 of those homes are represented here. The one on the left is owned by a couple named Elda and Jesus Reyes. They're immigrants. They bought that. This was the first home that they bought in Houston. Elda is a Spanish-only speaker, and they paid off their home in early 2019. They paid off their mortgage. It was theirs free and clear. They had raised their 3 children in this home. And a few months later, they got a letter from TxDOT saying, hey, we need this home to expand your highway. We need your home to expand this highway. And because, Elda only speaks Spanish, she was very much felt kind of cut out of this process and had a hard time understanding if and how she would get to keep her home. The other person here, this is Modesty Cooper. I took this picture a couple weeks ago at the book launch in Houston. Modesty she's actually my age. She's in her 30s. She was deployed in Iraq as a civilian serving for the US military, decided she wanted to come home to Houston where she grew up. And so she bought a parcel of land in Houston's 5th Ward and designed and built a home from the ground up, acting as her own contractor. In 2019, she also came home to Houston just to kind of move in her stuff and got a letter in the mail from the Texas Department of Transportation saying the exact same thing. Hey, we need your land to expand. We need your home to expand this highway. Modesty's reaction was a little bit stronger, and she said, no, thank you. And she actually filed a civil rights complaint with the Federal Highway Administration saying that the project, in TxDOT's own words, disproportionately impacted minority and low-income populations. And so as a result, that project was paused for 2 years. So that's a little bit of an overview of the highway expansions that I kind of look at the book and really explore in detail the personal stories behind them. But the kind of engine driving this book that drove my reporting began with this question. Widening urban highways doesn't fix traffic. Why are we spending billions of dollars to widen urban highways? This principle, the principle of induced demand, has been well understood since 1962. It was first articulated by an economist named Anthony Downs. This is the article he published in Traffic Quarterly. The Interstate Highway Program had just begun, and motorists were not seeing significant reductions in urban congestion. And he posited that as highway capacity expands, cars will fill up that capacity. And he labeled this the law of peak hour expressway congestion. That has been proven again and again, year after year after year. When you add lanes to a highway, cars will fill up those lanes. So why are we still doing this? And to answer that question, I really had to look at, against all evidence, why do we continue to spend lots of public money widening highways? And there are lots of different ways to answer that question, but one way is it's fundamentally a values question. It's a political question. So I want to share this campaign ad by our Texas Governor, Greg Abbott, which when he was running for office in 2014, he published this campaign ad.
A guy in a wheelchair can move faster than traffic on some roads in Texas. I'm Greg Abbott, and my plan adds billions for new road construction without raising taxes, fees, or tolls. We pay for it by ensuring that money dedicated for roads will be spent only on roads. And no more taking highway funds by the legislature to pay for their pet projects. Elect me, and I'll get Texas moving.
So there is this belief articulated by Greg Abbott there, and subsequently since he's been elected, that highways create prosperity. Allowing Texans to move seamlessly in their cars will attract businesses and keep the state's growth that has been the kind of bedrock of our prosperity. And as a result, since Abbott has been elected, he has dedicated a whole lot of money to expand urban highways across the state of Texas. 2 propositions were passed in 2014 and 2015 that allocated money to the State Highway Trust Fund, their taxes on oil and gas and also motor vehicles. And they have raised tens of billions of dollars to go to the Highway Trust Fund. As part of the ballot provision that added that, you can see here that these funds are only allowed to be used for roads. So as a result, about 97% of TxDOT's funding is constitutionally required to be spent on roads. So even as the state has boomed, even as Texas leaders say we need to invest in other modes, the state of Texas is hamstrung by this funding provision. Governor Abbott created a program called Texas Clear Lanes, which is explicitly for congestion relief projects in Texas cities. And to date, it has allocated $66.7 billion to widen highways, including the two that I opened with at the beginning. And I think this gets to kind of to answer the question of like, we're spending a lot of money to expand highways because there is a belief that highways support and enable free market capitalism. That, as Abbott said, roads are paid for by users, by drivers. That is the persistent belief. I have been in legislative hearings at the Texas State Capitol when activists and other folks tried to open up the State Highway Trust Fund to transit. And people say, I've sat and listened to activists say, testifying in committee, that transit is for socialists. And there is a belief that users support our highway system and that any money that we spend on transit is a government subsidy. And that is patently false. The state highway, the National Highway Trust Fund has been subsidized by general taxpayers since 2008. And we spend about 80% of our federal transportation money supporting highways and only 20% of it on transit. It wasn't supposed to be this way. So I'm going to kind of step back and take a historical perspective on this to the origins of the Interstate Highway Program. It was passed, as most of you probably know, under President Eisenhower. In 1956, he appointed a friend of his from the Army, General John S. Bragdon, to oversee the implementation of the Interstate Highway Program. By 1959, Bragdon discovered that the highway program was running significantly over budget, $11 billion over its $25 billion budget. And that's largely because urban highways were consuming a disproportionate share of federal money. And so he wanted to know, was the Interstate Highway Program intended to build highways through cities? Was it intended to solve the problem of urban congestion? And he asked Congress to look into that, to say, is federal money spent to be solved this new problem, this local need of solving congestion? And Congress, he asked Congress, and the Department of Commerce produced a report that said, in short terms, no, federal money was intended to connect the country. That's how Eisenhower sold this program to Congress. It was a national defense and economic development program to move goods across the country, to move military munitions across the country, to connect cities like Austin and Houston, not to solve traffic within Austin and within Houston. So Bragdon presents these findings to President Eisenhower in 1960. This is the report he produced. It's called the Interim Report. I actually went to the Eisenhower Presidential Library to read a copy of this report, the original one. I actually found the note cards that Bragdon gave and he prepared for his presentation to Eisenhower, like handwritten notes on them. And it's a pretty remarkable document. What it says in no uncertain terms is that interstate highways should not be directed towards the center of congestion. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'm going to direct you to the highlight in green, which is all of the experts say that the transportation problems of cities should be solved by rapid transit and mass transit. That urban highways are not going to solve the problem of urban congestion, and that what cities were doing instead of investing in transit was actively tearing it out to build these highways. And so Bragdon tells all of this to Eisenhower. He raises the question of, he tells him his request of the president is that Eisenhower direct the Bureau of Public Roads to direct states to spend the money on rural and highways connecting cities, rather than building these much more expensive highways through the middle of cities. And Eisenhower's response to this presentation is captured in a memorandum published a few days later. And he says that the matter of running interstate routes through the congested part of cities was entirely against his concept and wishes. But he says his hands are tied. It's an election year. A lot of this money has already been committed to states. He says the states would, quote, rise up in arms if he were to direct them to do something different. It's actually captured in his secretary's notes of that day that one of his advisors says that it would be, quote, murder to move in an election year. So for political reasons, Eisenhower did not want urban highways to be built through the middle of cities, but because of, kind of outside of his, this happened under his watch, and yet he was unable to correct it because of the politics. So we all know what happened. Highways plowed directly through the middle of almost every American city. This coincided with the era of urban renewal, in which city planners were looking for reasons to get rid of, quote unquote, blighted neighborhoods. Blighted reflected a racial 2 decades earlier in the 1940s, the Homeowners Loan Corporation had redlined many neighborhoods in America, saying that they They had denied them access to credit simply because Black and Hispanic and immigrant people lived there. This is one such neighborhood. This is a picture of the Fifth Ward in Houston. It's a historically Black neighborhood. It was redlined in the 1940s. And, fast forward 2 decades, planners saw an opportunity to get rid of these quote unquote so-called blighted neighborhoods. And that's what happened. This is a picture of what happened in the Fifth Ward today. This is the same intersection. You can see how much was demolished. And I spoke to several people, they're still alive, who remember what that neighborhood was like before the highway came through. I spoke with one woman, Oneri Goodry. She lives actually a couple blocks from Modesty Cooper, the woman a couple slides ago that I showed an image of. She's a Black woman in her 70s, and her family's home was demolished to build this very highway. And she talked to me about how she was a teenager when this happened, and it disrupted her whole life. She had to move 3 miles away. She really wanted to go to high school at Phyllis Wheatley High School, which is a very well-regarded Black high school in Houston. And so she walked 3 miles back to school every single day to go to high school because her family was displaced from her community where she had grown up. So the third highway that I profile in the book offers a different vision for the future. This is I-345. It bounds the eastern edge of downtown Dallas. It's an elevated highway. You can kind of see it in the distance there. It's a 1.4-mile stretch of highway. And you can see that it's surrounded by like surface parking lots. This is downtown Dallas. This is one of the city's most populous cities. And this highway is depressing a lot of the land, valuable land in downtown Dallas. And so about a decade ago, an urban planner named Patrick Kennedy moved to Dallas. He worked at downtown, and he lived in Deep Ellum, the neighborhood just east of the highway. And he walked to work every day under this highway. And he thought, why is this still here? Couldn't this be something better? And so he started a campaign to remove this stretch of highway, and really got all of Dallas talking about removal of I-345. Dallas District produced a document called City Map that explored removing this highway, found that congestion on nearby thoroughfares would increase only marginally, only about 1 to 3 minutes per driver. TxDOT in 2021 actually put, as they were considering the future of this highway, they considered removal as a formal project alternative under NEPA. And around the same time, the Tool Design Group, which I see was a sponsor of this webinar, they actually did a report looking at I-345 in Dallas and found that if that highway were removed, it would liberate, so either the exact footprint of the highway or the land surrounded it that is depressed by its presence, by surface parking or public storage, like land that is not being put to its highest and most valuable use. That removing that highway would impact 377 acres of land, representing $9 billion in development potential, and importantly, $235 million in property tax revenue. The city of Dallas does not earn enough tax revenue to pay for basic services for its residents. It is in desperate need of property tax revenue, and that highway is artificially depressing the land that could be put to higher use, including building 26,000 housing units right next to downtown Dallas, allowing people to live closer where they work and go to school so they don't have to drive as much. Why does this all matter? What is the bigger picture here? And for me, one of my motivations in reporting this book was looking at the climate impact of all these highways. They divide cities. They have displaced Black and Hispanic communities. They continue to displace Black and Hispanic residents. But I think above all that, they are fossil fuel infrastructure, and they are increasing greenhouse gas emissions the more that we encourage driving. So this is a chart pulled from a TxDOT greenhouse gas emissions analysis and climate change assessment. The last one they did, as far as I can tell, was in 2018. And I was just scrolling through this, as you do when you're a reporter, you read government documents. And it's showing the Texas on-road transportation and operation fuel cycle emissions. And I think what this is intended to show is that Texas on-road emissions are a small percentage of worldwide emissions. What I took from this is something very different. Texas on-road emissions account for 0.5% of total worldwide climate emissions. If you think of all the industries in all the countries in the world, we drivers in Texas are accounting for 0.5%. That means that these freeway fights happening in Texas, those folks that are resisting them, have significant climate impacts. In fact, this has been borne out by policy groups. This is a chart from the Georgetown Climate Center and Rocky Mountain Institute, which we don't have to get into the specifics, but what it shows is that highway expansion is having a measurable impact on states' total greenhouse gas emissions. And this is they looked at 12 states with the highest gas consumption, and they found that minimizing further highway expansion was the most important lever to avoid putting upward pressure on transportation emissions. This is Texas. The state of Texas will contribute more emissions if we continue on the status quo path than any other state. This is California. And we have the opportunity to reduce emissions more than any other state. So what happens in Texas is enormously consequential for the overall greenhouse gas reduction goals of the United States. President Biden passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021, and a nonprofit Transportation for America looked into how is that money getting spent. You know, the Biden administration has made big commitments to climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But what this shows, what this analysis by Transportation for America shows, is that a quarter of that money, $33 billion, is going to highway expansion. So a lot of the money of this bill flows directly to states, and states have the authority to do with it as they want. And many, like Texas, are choosing to spend it on highway expansion. So a lot of what I chronicle in my book are the people, the activists, who you're going to hear from in a little bit, Adam and Chloe, who are fighting these highway expansions. There are groups from across the country, grassroots groups. They are, you know, it's a real David and Goliath fight. These groups are largely volunteer run. They have almost no budget, and they are fighting state DOTs that have billion-dollar budgets, you know, multi-billion-dollar budgets. They convened for the first time in Cincinnati this fall. I went to cover it for Bloomberg. And it was the first kind of convening of the Freeway Fighters Network. It was sponsored by America Walks. And I thought it was like pretty remarkable to see all of these grassroots activists who have been fighting their own campaigns in their own cities and states come together to share strategy about how do we stop this form of development. This is Chloe's sister Molly and Susan Graham. They're two of the freeway fighters in Houston. They founded a group called Stop TxDOT I-45. On the right is a picture. Stop TxDOT I-45 has done a really remarkable job of canvassing Houston, going door to door in neighborhoods impacted by highway expansions to get normal, ordinary people involved in these hugely consequential decisions. So those are two volunteers knocking on the door. You can see the highway behind them. That house will get demolished by the highway. And I went out and followed them around. And a lot of people in the footprint of the expansion simply do not know. They do not know what's going to happen. And that speaks, I think, to TxDOT's lack of outreach in a lot of these communities. And so this is like a really great example of grassroots organizing in Houston, and that it's had a measurable impact on TxDOT's plans. In the summer of 2022, Stop TxDOT I-45 organized a protest about this apartment complex called Lofts at the Ballpark. It's a 3-building apartment complex that is right on a transit line, right near downtown Houston, and it's in the footprint of the North Houston Highway Improvement Project. TxDOT bought these buildings in 2020 before it was paused by the federal government. But in the summer of 2022, they moved forward with demolishing them after the federal government had said, hey, TxDOT, you need to stop all activities related to this project while we investigate the civil rights complaints filed by, among other people, Modesty, the woman who you saw earlier. A volunteer for Stop TxDOT I-45, a guy named Michael Moritz, was just going to work one day and he saw demolition fencing up around these apartment complexes. And he said, hang on a sec, I didn't know TxDOT could move forward with this. He called the demolition company and confirmed that TxDOT was planning to tear down all 3 buildings when only one of them had been accounted for in the environmental impact statement and the loss of housing. So it was something like 168 units had been accounted for in the environmental impact statement, and TxDOT was moving forward with tearing down more than 300. So Stop TxDOT protested. You can see that picture there. They made a fuss, and that fuss got the attention of the mayor, several city council members, FHWA, and as a result, the back 2 buildings were spared. TxDOT did not tear them down, and as far as I know, Chloe can give us an update there, moving forward with turning them into permanent supportive housing, which is one way to say, like, organizing works. This is Adam Greenfield, who you're also going to hear from later. This is a protest at the Texas Transportation Commission. TxDOT is overseen by the Texas Transportation Commission. There are 4 or 5 members appointed by Governor Abbott. And I kind of watched over the last 4 years as I was reporting this book, the activists across the state started talking to each other and organizing kind of concerted protest movements. And so people from across the state came to the Transportation Commission when they were considering the next year's budget to say, hey, we want more bike lanes. We want more transit. We don't want wider highways. And that had not happened before. You know, that a lot of these state agencies have not faced public resistance. And I have kind of chronicled how that is growing in Texas and across the country. One thing that these groups have done, I think, very effectively is try to visualize the impact of highway expansion. You know, a lot of these expansions, so I wrote a whole book about this, and still these expansions exist as basically PDFs in a computer. They are documents, they are bureaucratic projects. And I think it's very hard for kind of normal people who do not work in transportation planning to like visualize and understand what's actually going to happen in their city. And so what these grassroots groups I think have done very, very effectively is try to show that. So on the left with the pink line, it's a cafe in Austin, and that pink tape represents the right-of-way that TxDOT wants to take to expand the highway. That tape goes all the way over the building and around to the back and into the neighborhood of Cherrywood. And that shows like what will be gone, what will be just become concrete. And similarly, Stop TxDOT I-45 went around into the neighborhoods around the expansion and stenciled this paint onto sidewalks to show, hey, here's the right-of-way line. Here's where TxDOT wants to expand the highway. I think to help people understand like what will happen, what will be the impacts of these projects that really exist in like very bureaucratic language. Oops. Oh, well, I messed up. But anyway, I just want to leave you on a more hopeful note. Let's see if I can get this back. There we go. I want to leave you on a more hopeful note. This is the city of Rochester, New York. The ultimate argument of my book is that we should actually tear down many of these urban highways and put that land to more productive use, as has been considered in Dallas, as has been done in cities across the country. Portland has removed urban highways, Milwaukee, San Francisco. It's, you know, kind of an idea that is gaining steam. And the city of Rochester in 2017 got a grant from the federal government to fill in part of their inner loop highway. And so on the picture on the left is the Inner Loop North, which still exists, and the one on the right is a section of highway called Inner Loop East. That used to be a highway. That used to look exactly like that picture on the left. And what the city has done is filled it in, brought it up to grade, built a really beautiful bike lane, a very wide sidewalk, trees, and 3-story apartment buildings that are being rented to people earning below the median income. And I think it's a really remarkable thing to experience. It was for me going to Rochester and seeing a highway. And for most of us, including me, I'm 37, my entire life has spent wrapped in highways. It's very hard to imagine what cities might look like without highways running through them. And I think what highway removal does in a place like Rochester does is show a different future. This is just construction. You know, we spent billions of dollars to build these highways, and we can certainly make different decisions and remove them. And I'm going to stop sharing and open up to have this conversation.
Thanks, Megan. I'd like to invite both Chloe and Adam to join us on screen. I think they're, oh, no, they already are. Okay, great. Yeah, I think we can digest a little bit of, what Megan's shown us out of both of your freeway fights that you're involved with, and then thinking about, what's a vision for the future. And so I'd like to invite Chloe and Adam. I think if each of you could just tell us a little bit about the movement you're involved with and what's at stake in Houston and Austin.
Yeah, so I'm in Stop TxDOT I-45. I've been organizing with the group basically since it started in 2019, thanks to my sister, who looped me in. And like Megan said, there's, by the numbers, there's so much at stake, which is the homes of thousands and thousands of Houstonians, 300 plus businesses employing over 10,000 people, $10 billion, which even now is starting to feel like a conservative estimate. But it's also like, it's just this entrenched racism, this really kind of pernicious lie that a freeway benefits everybody in a city when it really only benefits a few people. And Megan does a really good job saying it in the book. Like it's hard to retool a bad choice, especially one that was made 70 years ago and is proven to be kind of a flop. But it'll be even harder to retool that bad choice another 70 years from now, when I-45 is done, when traffic has gotten worse, when the flooding has gotten worse, and when the infrastructure is starting to falter again, and we get this opportunity to stop it. It just keeps getting harder. So like we're really marrying ourselves to a method here that we already know it's very, very pernicious and pervasive, and it's segregating everything about the way that we live. which is just so painful. Adam?
Yeah, hi. So Rethink 35 was started in 2020. What a year. And we were started to try and stop the proposed I-35 expansion and to propose a community process for something better. TxDOT plans to expand about 28 miles of I-35 through Austin. They've broken the project into 3 segments, and the central portion is about 8 miles through central Austin, and that's really the project that gets most of the attention. And certainly we can start by saying over 100 homes and businesses destroyed for the highway. We can talk about TxDOT's own projections that would show a 60% increase in cars going through Austin, about 130,000 extra cars a day. There's about 80 schools and preschools within close proximity to the highway. People disproportionately suffer health impacts within half a kilometer or so of the highway. But it really, I-35 is a trench that fundamentally divides our city. It is, I mean, it makes the Berlin Wall look like Shangri-La, or as I imagine it must have in 1989. It is just fundamentally a horrific, bleak, apocalyptic place to be. It is just awful, an awful place where there should be something that brings us together, where we would want to go to enjoy our lives. And for me, that's part of the motivation here. Is we're not just trying to stop a bad thing. We are together giving birth to something that really rights the wrongs of best part of 100 years. And to me, it's incredibly inspiring to see examples like Rochester, San Francisco, Portland, and many other cities. And we are the ones turning the ship around, and it is one of the great honors of my life.
I think the your Berlin Wall reference is very pointed, right? Because I think we often think of infrastructure as immutable. And speaking from my own perspective as once upon a time an archaeologist, we very well know that what we build is not permanent, and that we can make changes to our cities and our communities. But Megan, to your point, right? Like a lot of the younger members of the United States have grown up with only a highway system. And we're sort of at this pivotal moment, right, where a lot of these highways are reaching the end of their designed lifespan. And so, we have to make that choice, right? What are we doing now as these structures are starting to crumble? And so, Megan, I'm wondering if you could give just a little bit more, perspective from moving out of Texas to thinking about a national perspective, about what's at stake here, as a country, if we either continue on the current course, or if we start to change direction a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to your previous point, like I document in the book the kind of early wave of freeway revolts in the 50s and 60s, and they were mass movements. Tens of thousands of people turned out to protest the construction of many highways across the country. And I think the reason we aren't seeing that kind of mass movement today is because we have grown up with them, because they appear like a status quo. And what I wanted to do with my book is show this is a policy decision. We are making policy decisions to keep these and to expand them. So what's at stake for me, and I get at it with some of those slides, is like the climate impact. I think that really galvanized a lot of my reporting. Cars are fossil fuel infrastructure. Highways enable more driving, and that will only increase emissions. And that gives me a lot of urgency around this reporting. The I-35 project that Adam referenced, the Central Project, TxDOT issued their record of decision allowing them to move forward with construction in August of last year, at the end of the hottest summer on record in Austin. And that to me felt like an existential threat to my ability to continue living here. So I think climate change is a hugely galvanizing force for my journalism, but also the activists who are protesting these highways. I mean, there are climate activists, like in Portland, for example, the Sunrise Movement has gotten involved with protesting a highway expansion there. So teenagers in Portland have protested for 2 years outside of the Oregon Department of Transportation headquarters. But, there are all sorts of other negative consequences. Air pollution is one of them. 53,000 people die every year because of attributable to transportation related air pollution. That's a huge number. 40,000 people die every year because of traffic violence. So these are really like polluting, dangerous structures. And the contention of my book is that a lot of people don't want to be driving. I think that we have not, the kind of a lot of the way this is framed is giving people more choices. In Texas, the kind of narrative tends to be people want to drive, so we have to accommodate that. And I think that is false. And I think that is provably false, that people's preferences across the country are to have more transit available to them. And yet at a high level policy perspective, we do not spend money building transit. 80% of federal transportation money goes to supporting highways and roads, and only 20% goes to transit. So like, until that changes, we are not going to have good, robust transit in American cities.
It's really interesting in your book in particular, thinking about highway projects. They last in terms of some of the planning phases can last years, if not decades. They have been on, in a plan somewhere, some of them for, like half a century. And so these highway projects, they're really just they're slow and boring, and they're bureaucratic, and they're meant to sort of proceed under the radar. So I'm curious, for our panel here as, author and activists, how do you keep people interested in something that's mundane? How do you rally people and get them out and make them aware of what's going on?
I'll let the activists take that first.
When I was kind of thinking this through ahead of time, one of the things that I saw, Susan Graham just had an interview. Susan Graham's one of the founders of Stop Texas I-45. And she had an interview just posted in Strong Towns on my blog. And a big part that they hinged on in that interview and in the article about it was that it's just a movement of huge love. Like it comes out of a love for place, a love for people. It's very sustaining to know that you're in this with people who care about other people. And that really gives a lot of love. Like, I really love Houston. I love Stop Texas. I love the trees. I love the bayous. I even love that it's humid here and that the bayous there be bugs everywhere, because that's like part of what makes Houston such a special city in the state and in the country. And kind of to go back to like what's at stake really is the idea of Houston, the idea of Austin is at risk because the cities are being paved over. Megan talks about it a lot. The point of transportation is to get somewhere. And the more you're going through this, the less you're there. You're never there. The anti-place, and we're losing so much of what Houston is. But Stop Texas has it in our guiding rules for the group is if you are tired and you want to put down the burden you've chosen to pick up in this fight, somebody else is going to pick it up for you. And then we will be there with open arms and open heart when you're ready to come back. And, we hang up the phone and say, I love you. Take as much time as you need. You come back when you're ready. And we're always training people. We're always bringing in new people. And events like the protest for the lofts at the ballpark, I think most of the crowd there were people I had never met before. And that was 3 years into organizing with Stop Texas. It was all new people, so many young people. There are just these moments where something that you love is being taken away or being harmed. And it's very galvanizing and very sustaining, I think. And it's part of what's making the Texas movement really powerful is that we are so connected. We talk to Adam weekly. We talk to Miriam and Kelsey and everybody in Austin all the time. It's sustaining to know that you're not fighting alone. And that's also part of the National Freeway Fighting Network and the conference. It's just, you're right. You know that you're right. The data is all there. So it's just about giving each other enough love and energy to sustain it. And everybody takes their little piece, I think.
You're so right, Chloe, and I totally feel the same way there. I think, and a large part of what Rethink 35 is culture comes from has been inspired by y'all in Houston, because this is hard work. These are huge issues that are very, very heavy. And I think you have to bring into your group a culture of community, of support, and fun. Like, for example, tomorrow here in Austin, the Rethink 35 team is getting together, and we're going to have a potluck on the Fluger pedestrian bridge in Austin. As the sun goes down, we're going to just have this magical experience together to celebrate the last 4 or 5 months, because so much has happened. And I think you've got to find regularly those beats in the campaign to celebrate, to build community. We have monthly socials where you can get together and just meet people and enjoy their company. And yes, we'll talk shop as well. But if all you want to do is have fun, you want to be part of our campaign. That's kind of how it goes. And from there, once you build that supportive structure, then you can really accomplish things. And some of the beats in your campaign will be influenced by the sort of quote unquote official beats, a public comment period, a critical vote at city council. And that's when you mobilize people and you create the theater with the speeches, with signs, with T-shirts and the visuals. We had a rally in November where we had a huge 30-foot by 30-foot banner that we pulled out saying WIDA won't work, and that image has kind of become iconic since then, and you see it all over the place. So it's got to start with treating yourself well, with treating the people in your community well, with celebrating all the time, and just being very conscious about how welcoming you are to new people. Because I've been there, I've been part of campaigns where I was the new one and I didn't know what was going on. And you need a friend at the beginning. So it starts with people and you move from there.
Megan, as an author?
Yeah, that was the hardest part of this book, was animating it and creating a narrative. I did a writing fellowship with other journalists who were working on books about different topics, and one of the women asked me if I got lonely reporting on highways. And I was like, well, I'm not talking to the highways. I'm talking to people, the people who are impacted by these highways. And so that was a hard job, is to find the people impacted. The activists like Adam and Chloe were really wonderful in helping me connect me to those people. I mean, I also a movement is only people moving, and Adam and Chloe ignited movement. So as a journalist, it made my job much easier to go see what they're moving toward. Who are they motivating? But, I knocked on a lot of doors. I probably talked to 200 people reporting this book, people led me to other people. I really wanted to find people who had been displaced by these highways to begin with in the 50s and 60s. That required a lot of door knocking, a lot of just calling people up. I also found that I really had to explain to people why I wanted to talk to them. So I wanted to talk to commuters, for example, people who had been priced out of cities like Austin or Houston, who had to drive back in. And so I talked to several people, and I commuted with several people, one of whom made it into the book. But I really had to explain to her, here's why I think your story helps tell the story of I-35, is a lot of the people on this highway don't want to be there. They want to be living in Austin, but our housing policy has prevented that. So I think drawing the connections for people, even as I was reporting, was important and helpful, and really kind of showing the human impacts of these decisions today. And that was that's kind of my mandate and job as a journalist. But I really like the challenge of animating the unanimal. Whoa, that's a weird word. I like the job of animating the things that are just concrete, seemingly static. They aren't. Highways are not static. There's a time before and there will be a time after.
I'm going to encourage audience members to submit your questions. We're going to get to them in 1 minute. Before we do, though, I just want to give Adam and Chloe an opportunity. If you were to sum up, what the vision for Austin and Houston would be, if your movement is successful, what does that look like?
Let you go first.
Well, the vision starts with process, a process that actually includes and centers communities and what they want and what they see. And there's certainly, everyone has their own realm of specialty and expertise, including our friends in the government, our friends in organizations, and our neighbors. One of the proposals that Rethink 35 would like to see studied is the idea of an interstate highway going around town rather than through the middle of it, using an existing highway. There actually is a highway in Austin called SH-130 that was explicitly built for this purpose, but then they told it, so people don't really use it. So once the interstate highway would go around town, you don't also need one going through town, and that could kind of go through a Rochester-like experience. By the way, TxDOT is actually proposing to do what Rochester started to reverse, years ago. They actually want to dig a trench through the middle of our city. But it could be a boulevard. But again, that's one proposal we want to put forward for consideration, but the community should be driving this.
Yeah, that's something that Stop TxDOT centers ourselves on constantly, is about like what's our value. And what we really miss in so much of this planning is that it's so full of loopholes that even when we can get to the table, even when we can get 65 people into the TTC to look Bruce Bug in the eye and say, what you do is not data driven, what you do is not proven, what you do has physical consequences. We can get in the room, but there's just so many loopholes that allow TxDOT to operate without any feedback, without any insight, without they have no boss, they don't answer to people. So like the real vision is a system change that allows people to determine things for themselves. The freedom that the car promised us took all of that freedom. And to get it back, we need to be part of the process to make it. So, there have been designs floated by the city of Houston that were better than TxDOT's. There have been, designs coming from people within our group who are inspired to turn I-45 into a boulevard. People say it all the time, especially with constant buzz about high-speed rail between Houston and Dallas. Like, we have the right of way, it's already there. Why don't we put a train on I-45, but none of it matters if the people who are living along I-45 didn't know it was coming, didn't hear about it because they speak Spanish. I talked to a family who spoke Swahili. Nobody ever tried to reach them. Luckily there was a kid who could translate, but the process is just so convoluted and it's so pervasive. So yeah, we need a system that lets people do some self-determining.
Yeah, so thinking about the process, this is a great segue into one of our audience questions here. If you are, involved in a freeway fighting movement or starting a freeway fighting movement, in your community, who do you need to be talking to, and who are your natural allies?
Great question. Stop TxDOT works with a network of value-aligned organizations, air quality organizations, neighborhoods who have already experienced this pain of freeway placement in the first place, super neighborhoods. But Susan started talking to her neighbors, and that was a really great place to start. And that's kind of what's come from it. And then you get to the power mapping later, you get a couple policy wonks in your group who can read the document that shows you where those levers are, and then you start to really push up the ladder, I think.
Yeah, I would second that. I think find the next person. The next person who can join you on this adventure is the next most important person. You need to build some kind of a team as quickly as possible that can, because it shouldn't, if you're the person who's thinking about this, it shouldn't be all on you. It won't perpetuate itself. And this movement, which I think many of us would consider the second freeway revolt movement, it's still young. It still needs a lot of support. It's under-resourced, as Megan said earlier. It needs all kinds of assistance. But find the people who can support you. It certainly is extremely important to have eventually, sooner rather than later, a mixture of people who are impacted by the highway currently, people in elected office, and so forth. And I'll just say, by the way, there is huge support for stopping freeway expansions and freeway removals among office holders. They don't always feel like they can speak out about it, but there is huge support for it. And I will also say among people who work in government departments as well. I mean, I know people at TxDOT who seriously are thinking about quitting because they're just so upset about what's happening. There are other people at TxDOT who are joining because they're inspired to help turn that agency around and get it investing in the right things. So there's so much potential here. Everything you need to win your campaign is out there. It's just bringing it together and harnessing the force, and it will take time and energy, but it's out there.
So it seems like a bit of like a game of whack-a-mole with a lot of these highway expansions across the country, where individually local campaigns are fighting them in cities, communities, spread out geographically. I think I'll offer this question to Megan first and open it up to Adam and Chloe. What would be, if we're thinking about like a systematic change at, let's say, the local, the state, or the federal level, what would be the top changes we need to make if we want to reform our transportation system?
Yeah, I love that question because I love writing about policy. This begins a lot of it with the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Acts, a lot of the kind of parameters and rules that set like what funding is possible, what funding can be used for. It happens in that bill. So the last one was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and that largely maintained the status quo of most of our money going to highways. And so to change that, we need to change how this program is funded. And the House had a pretty good bill last session. I mean, last Congress, the Congress considered the House bill, which I think would have changed some things. But I think really starting with that bill, making explicit that we should not be spending so much money to expand highways, and that really starts with the formula funding system. All this money gets collected through the gas tax. It's funneled into the Highway Trust Fund and then it's distributed to states like Texas to do as they please. So the kind of like pie in the sky notion that I offer with my book, and maybe I shouldn't call it pie in the sky, I like really wanted to shift the kind of discussion around what is possible, is we should get rid of the Highway Trust Fund. That was created with the creation of the Interstate Highway Act. It was intended to expire when the Interstate Highway Program was built out in 1973. And in 1973, there was a very robust discussion around the wisdom of spending all of our transportation money perpetuating highways. People in both parties, Republicans, testified on the floor of the House saying this is only going to make the problem worse. We're going to increase congestion and air pollution, and we won't solve urban congestion. And so I think really changing how we fund transportation. I saw there was a question in the comments around like, well, transit is funded locally. That's because the federal government doesn't spend money on it. Texas doesn't spend money on transportation. So the city of Austin is left to its own devices. Me as a resident of Austin, voted to increase my property taxes so that we could build a transit system. The like root cause of that is that the federal government is not spending money to support urban transit, and we could change that in the next Surface Transportation Reauthorization.
Well, we have to put you on the spot. You unmuted yourself, but you say a little bit more about what has been going on in Houston with regards to MPO reform as a lever for change?
Man, that is a great question. So something that came out of getting people really fired up about transportation in Houston was looking really long and hard at those local funding leaders, the people who are allocating this, which is for us, the Houston Galveston Area Council. Megan reports on this extensively. It's they're our metropolitan planning organization for the greater Houston region. The Transportation Policy Council within the HGAC is the one who's saying, yes, let's get money for I-45. We're going to commit local funds. We're going to request the federal funding for it. And all over the country, MPOs just like ours were set up a long time ago, and they were kind of set up Senate style. So everybody has pretty much equal representation. But when Houston has more than 60% of the population served by that board, we can't have the same amount of say as some of those suburbs. I mean, we get outvoted continually. Houston and Harris County voted against funding I-45 in 2021, and they were completely outvoted by all of the commuter counties around us. So Fair for Houston was a ballot initiative to reform that. We said, you know, we're going to get our signatures. People are going to vote on this. If Houston doesn't get proportional representation on this board, Houston is going to pull out of the MPO. And it was kind of a moonshot thing. Like people, this is unprecedented. And it's shaken out that people really don't know what to do with it now. You know, we got shot down again. There were credible proposals on the table to fix that voting proportion within the timeline that the ballot initiative gave. And we got voted out by the surrounding counties again. And in fact, the HGAC has added another ex-urban group to our regional board. So the Woodlands has just entered the HGAC as well. So our representation is getting even slimmer. But it's all on the record now. It's on the record as this being in opposition to the will of Houston voters. It is out in the news. There are groups in other cities, in other states, who are doing ballot initiatives to fix their MPO now. So, you know, we started a little path that you can take here to really draw attention to when those loopholes are being exploited to keep your city bound by freeways. So every bit of this that happens in the public eye is huge. And I don't know where we go from, you know, Fair for Houston Proposition B now that it's kind of hit this stalemate, but it's all on record as having happened. And now we know how people feel about it. So it's definitely something to watch. And it's definitely something to watch out for coming soon to a city near you, I think, which is very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really seems like, you know, from the local to the state to the federal level, it's about, you know, it's about prioritizing where our money is spent. And, you know, we hear time and time again, you know, you don't have the money for the sidewalk, you don't have the money for the bike lane, you don't have the money for the crosswalk, you don't have the money to fix potholes on local streets. And yet, you know, Texas comes up with $33 billion to keep building highways. We don't have the money for housing. We don't have the money for on and on. We are coming up on our hour.
I would just make one point there, which I think
go for that. Yeah.
Right, is Los Angeles activists in LA canceled a highway widening. They fought for 2 decades to cancel the widening of 710. And very recently, Metro, the Metropolitan Planning Organization in LA, you decided to reallocate $743 million from highway expansion to active transportation and transit. So like there is a real opportunity cost to widening these highways, and that money could be spent better. And LA offers a very compelling example of how that can be done.
So the good news is our panelists have very generously offered to stay on. We're going to open up a separate Zoom room right after this, not a Zoom webinar, but a room. Think of this as the schmoozing after the event. So that link for that room is going to be in the chat. We'll start that up after we wrap up here. And if you want to come and talk, say hello, have a conversation, get into some of the nitty gritty on the policy, the organizing, please join us there. There are a few other opportunities if you want to continue the conversation as well. We at America Walks are the co-hosts of the Freeway Fighters Network that Megan talked about. And we have both a newsletter that's a weekly digest of what's going on in the news with regards to fighting freeways and reconnecting communities. You can sign up, get that once weekly. If you want to be a little more involved, we also have a listserv That's pretty active. A lot of different folks talking about a lot of great things on there. And the links to sign up for both of those will be in the chat. And once again, our programming's made possible through your generous support too. So if you'd like to consider donating today, I'd like to thank you in advance. And then last, but certainly not least, we have our next webinar coming up, People Over Parking, looking at parking reform and its connection to the walking movement. That will be on Wednesday, June 5th at 2 p.m. And the link for that, for you to register there, will be in the chat as well. So let's take a moment and just give a virtual, or I can give an actual round of applause for our great panelists today. And be on the lookout for Megan's book, City Limits, available everywhere. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.